It is now my honor to introduce our commencement speaker. Jesmyn Ward is described as the heir apparent to William Faulkner, a testament to both her Southern roots and her world-renowned prose. The comparison is apt. Jesmyn is the most important storyteller of the 21st century, and she wields what is perhaps the most significant, powerful voice in modern literature. Inspired by her childhood in Tulane, Mississippi, Jesmyn's words are experiential and lived in. And with them, she tackles nationally relevant themes of poverty, race, and power. Better than any author today, Jesmyn pushes her audience to imagine what it means to grow up African American in rural modern America. Her writing embodies the notion of empathy, urging readers to try and see the world through a lens they might have never considered. Jesmyn joins an elite list of authors who won the National Book Award twice. That group includes Saul Bellow, John Cheever, William Faulkner, Philip Roth, John Updike, and Jesmyn Ward. She is the first woman ever to win that prestigious award twice. The judges described her 2017 award-winning novel, Sing Unburied Sing, as, quote, a narrative so beautifully taught and heartbreakingly eloquent that it stops the breath. In 2017, Jesmyn was awarded one of the highly coveted MacArthur Fellowships Awards, the so-called Genius Grants. And earlier this year, she made Time Magazine's top 100 most influential people in the world. Please join me now in welcoming our speaker, Jesmyn Ward.
I have to fiddle with this. Good morning, y'all. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here sharing this momentous day with all of you. Before I begin, I want to thank President Fitz, the faculty, staff, and everyone at Tulane University who made it possible for me to be here today. So I want to tell you a story. I grew up in a poor, rural, mostly black community in Mississippi. Both sides of my family, my mother's and my father's, have lived there for generations. When my grandmother was a child, first she studied at a one-room school that her father built to provide schooling for black children. And then later she walked 2 miles to a school next to the local Catholic church where she studied basic math and reading and writing. When she wasn't in school, she worked in her father's fields, weeding and picking. My grandmother's schooling ceased when she was 13. There was no curriculum for high school education, no teacher for it in the 1940s. After she left school, my grandmother worked many jobs to support herself and her children. She was determined that her children would finish high school. 4 of her children, including my mother, graduated. 3 of her children did not. None of them graduated college. My grandmother thought that if her children finished high school, they wouldn't have to work as hard as she did. She thought they wouldn't have to labor as housekeepers or as maids. But her kids' lives were as hard as hers. They too scrubbed motel restrooms, they mopped floors, they served at lavish parties. Their lives seemed to tell the same story that hers did. When I was young, all of the adults in my life were drifting from job to job or wrestling with substance abuse. With that peculiar certainty that the young possess, I believe their lives told the stories of their youthful foibles. I believe that the drudgery of their lives, the result of one colossal wrong choice. In my head, the decision to leave school. They worked one dead-end job after another, or they were chronically unemployed, living from paycheck to paycheck. And I was determined that this would not happen to me, that I would not live the rest of my life in my small, rural town, scrabbling for resources or working myself to the grave. One of the most important life lessons I thought I learned at the end of my high school career was this: the choices you make as an adolescent will determine your entire life. So I studied. On Friday and Saturday nights, I pored over college admission applications. I worked on my essays, I answered questionnaires, I did anything I could do to get into a good university that would provide me with the way out of the narrow future I felt tightening around my neck, threatening to choke me. That sense of discipline and studiousness was a good thing. It meant I understood the value of hard work. But I was looking at the situations of the people I love dimly. I was judging their educational choices without asking myself what realities narrowed their choices, what circumstances limited what they could aspire to. I didn't understand that the legacy of history and generational poverty and intergenerational trauma meant that most of them asked themselves these questions when they were teenagers. Do I continue to go to school, or should I work? Should I buy propane and wood, or should I freeze? Should I eat, or should I starve? I didn't understand that writing a different story for myself meant I not only had to make wise choices, plural, but have the gift of luck and better circumstance as well. I didn't understand that my mother and father had given me an outrageous gift because I didn't have to choose between eating and my education. I didn't understand any of this when I matriculated to Stanford. All I saw was the promise of my one perfect choice, the promise inherent in education. I was the child of cleaning women and bootleggers, factory workers, and landscapers. Of course, the people in my family taught me this narrative when I was a child. Of course, they believed in learning as strongly as I did, given that education seemed a magical key that would open the door to a life not bound by poverty, not restricted by the circumstances of birth. My mother held the truth of this tenet close to her when she scrubbed floors. My grandmother held it fast while she stood on an assembly line for 10-hour shifts, doing quality control on seemingly endless processions of bottles of Pepto-Bismol and Maalox. And they told it to me nearly every day of my entire life. Before meals, before bedtime, repeated it like a prayer. You will go to college. The subtext was this: you will be free of this drudgery, this tragedy, this mill. You will be free. And I believed them. I believed that one task, going to university, would be the key to changing the narrative, to escaping the legacy of being poor and Black and Southern. In college, I wasn't the standout student I had been in high school. Instead, I was decent, even though I worked as diligently as I had before. University was much harder than high school. Not only was the work harder, but the sense that I'd had in high school that I could study my way to a better life seemed confused. The relationship between studious effort and success blurred. Instead of pre-med or law or business, I was drawn to literature and creative writing. I tried to study other subjects, anxious to see if I would feel the persistent burr of curiosity, the rush of passion and reverence that came when I read poetry and fiction. I didn't. What would I do with this passion for words that would not leave me? Graduation came and went, and I had no idea. I applied for job after job, and I almost began crying in a Macy's when the clerk ringing up my purchase told me that he too had been an English major in school. I thought I might try to be a writer one day, but in my early 20s, I was no Jessie. I didn't even understand what a plot was. I attempted to write short stories, but found myself with pages of extended scenes instead. My characters were flat and unbelievable. My dialogue was painfully fake. While my ambitious, savvy, assertive friends who'd majored in economics and political science were being snatched up for jobs, I was applying for positions in marketing and television and journalism and never hearing anything back. So after I sat where you are now, in my own graduation ceremony, I was giddy with elation and rigid with dread all at once. I did the only thing I could do, considering I had no job offer and no prospects and only a passion for something that I wasn't very good at. I moved home. 6 months after I moved home, a drunk driver rear-ended my brother and killed him. And everything changed. I questioned all that I thought I knew, shocked at the unpredictability of life, the irrefutable fact of death. I realized that a magic job wasn't going to fall into my lap, that my education was not the only choice to guarantee success, that sometimes life was hard without reason. So I adapted to my changed circumstances, just as generations of my family members had done before me. I did what I had to do. I applied for holiday work at the local Tommy Hilfiger outlet. I was one of 2 college graduates who worked in the store. I was the only one who'd earned a coterminal master's degree. I moved in a fog of grief. I barely talked to my coworkers, instead folding and rearranging a wall of jeans until the skin on my hands turned white and cracked. I spoke with friends who lived in New York City, and they encouraged me to move there to search for work. I was desperate, so I moved to New York City and interviewed for a job in publishing, and I worked there for 2 years. Surprise, I wasn't a very good publishing assistant. I was too depressed at my brother's leaving and too distracted by that persistent need to write, even badly. It was then that I realized completing university was not an ending, but instead was the beginning to finding my way to doing something meaningful. I learned that for most of us, there are no easy singular ascents, and I realized I wanted to be a writer. So I began to do the work. I made an important choice. I took a step. I read widely. I read contemporary writers who were strangers to me, and I read classic writers I didn't read in school. I did as my grandmother and the people I love in my life did to survive. I adapted. I made another choice. I took another step. I wrote bad poems that I hid from others, but I didn't attempt to write any more short stories because I realized I had only a dim idea of the conversation unspooling through the centuries that I was attempting to join by writing literature. So I read more. For 2.5 years, I read. And at the end of that time, I wrote and revised 1 short story. I made a choice. I took another step. I applied for MFA programs and was accepted to the MFA program at the great University of Michigan. I made a choice. I took another step. I studied fiction at U of M. I wrote my first novel while I was there. I realized that becoming a writer would require me to continue to work hard, to face rejection, to make choice after choice that would one day lead me to holding a published book I'd written in my hands. I realized that education wasn't one choice. Instead, it was a lifetime's undertaking. As an adult, I understand that finding the kind of life I want to live required constant work, constant study, constant risk-taking, and that there were no easy routes to success for people like me. So for a decade, I made the best choices I could. I tried not to bow under the weight of rejection. After Hurricane Katrina roared through my hometown, I moved there and worked as a teacher, and I revised my MFA thesis for 3 years. It took that long before a publisher decided to purchase the rights and publish it as a novel. Through it all, I read and I wrote. Sometimes my stories thrilled readers. Sometimes my stories bored my readers and they couldn't even finish reading them. Whatever the response, I upheld my end of the bargain. I read, I wrote, I revised. I chose education again and again. And I submitted my work to the gatekeepers again and again, and I faced rejection again and again. I made choices, I took steps, and I persisted. My years in college and afterward taught me this. Success is not the result of making one good choice, of taking one step. Real success requires step after step after step after step. It requires choice after choice. It demands education and passion and commitment and persistence and hunger and patience. And not the easy hunger, like the hunger for sweets that plagued me so when I was young, when I wanted instant success. I wanted a lifetime of reward after 4 years of effort. Sometimes this kind of success happens for young people like Zadie Smith and Edward Danticott, who are incredibly gifted writers who bang out beautiful bestsellers in their late teens and early 20s. But for so many others, this doesn't happen. For many others, success comes after hundreds of hours of work and lucky breaks and study and heartbreak and loss and wandering. As an adult, I learned this: persist, work hard. Face rejection, weather the setbacks until you meet the gatekeeper who will open a door for you. Sometimes when you are 20 when you stumble upon an open doorway. Sometimes you are 30. Sometimes you're 40 or 50 or 60. I remembered this when I felt like giving up, when I thought I'd pack all my notebooks and stories into plastic bins and put them away, when I thought I would resign them to the recycling bin. And I remembered this new lesson I'd learned about persistence and success when I looked again at my parents, my uncles and aunts, all the people in my small rural Black community who persisted, even with the promise of less on the horizon. I looked at them and all the old disdain I'd harbored at their lives dissolved, and it turned to understanding. I understood what it meant to do the best you can with what you've been given. For my grandmother, who only had a 6th grade education, this meant educating herself in trades and skills as an adult. She studied to be a seamstress, a nurse's aide, a hairdresser, so she could support herself and her children. Success for her came when she was nearly 50, when she gained a job in a pharmaceutical packing plant with health insurance, competitive salary, enough money so that she didn't have to struggle to figure out how she would pay her bills, clothe, and feed her children. When I was young, her life looked like failure, a result of bad decisions, something to be averted. When I became an adult, I realized her life couldn't be described in such glib terms, that life was a tumultuous sea, and that my grandmother had spent her days afloat on a raft, and she paddled and bailed water and read the map of constellations in the sky to find land, reprieve, and survive. Be patient with yourself. If you are one of those lucky people who are exceptionally good at an endeavor you're passionate about, if you possess tireless ambition and keen direction right now, congratulations. You will go far and do well. Your successes will come early and rapidly. If you are not one of those lucky people, if you are bewildered and confused and clinging tenaciously to some course you love, be patient. Work hard. Hold your dream tightly to you and do everything you can to realize it within reason. Take a step that will lead you toward the realization of your dream, and then take another and another and another. Hold fast to your oars. Hoist the sails to the wind. Read the pictures in the stars. Look beyond the horizon to that which you can't see but dimly sense in your future, the curving inlet, the sandy beach. Know that even those calm waters may harbor boulders, craggy rocks intent on rending the bottom of your boat, that when you land, you may find your legs too weak to walk well, still shaky from the sea, and that the soil may have its own perils. But know that this is life. And also know that the fruit on the trees, sweet and warm to the mouth, is life as well. Persist, be patient, be well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesmyn. Tulane is truly privileged to call you one of our own. You are a transcendent literary talent. But before we move on, there's one last story about you that I'd like to share. I read that as a young girl, Jesmyn would look at Mississippi's literary map with wonder. She said, here's Faulkner, here's Welty, here's Richard White. And I think a part of me always dreamed, what if? What would it be like to be on that map one day? Well, it turns out, of course, that Mississippi has added you to its literary map, and we framed it for you today, and this is for you.